You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Battista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Gibson. Unlocking happiness through attachment theory, emotional healing, core wounds, and boundaries. Ladies, I know that you're going to be obsessed with this episode because I have Gibson here. She's a PhD candidate. I mean, that's impressive. With over 13 certifications in modalities such as CBT, NLP, somatic experiencing, internal family systems, shadow work. She's got a decade of experience running a successful private practice and working with over 30,000 clients. And she has this expertise in attachment, one of my favorite topics. She's created the Gibson Integrated Attachment Theory, which is a framework that uses traditional attachment theory, developmental psychology, and potent subconscious reprogramming techniques. And she teaches it all in her personal development school. So it's super exciting. She's got a program that's like booked with a 2-year wait list. She has her program in 113 countries. She's got 38 million views on social media. And people who do her work have a 95% satisfaction rate with their relationships. So obviously pay attention. Welcome, Thais. I'm so happy that you're here.
Hi, Marni. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
So what year are you in your PhD? How much longer do you have to go?
I actually completed my PhD. I think it needs to be updated. I was like, the bio needs an update. But yeah, I completed it. And
that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a journey, but it's been a really beautiful experience and trying to manage work-life balance with everything, but it's been a really cool time. So
that's so cool. My daughter just graduated from college, and so we went to her graduation, and she wants to get a PhD. She's very worried that she's going to be almost 30 by the time that happens. But anyway, so all the professors are up there, and they're all wearing their robes from where they went to school, right? And so she's like, wow, I'm looking at the outfits. Like, depends on where you go to school on what fit you get for your PhD. Very important. This is really cute.
And what is she studying? What is she interested in doing?
She's a biochemistry major.
Well, good
so
for her.
Science-y stuff. Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
It's anyway, I just have a whole newfound respect for the whole process because I know it takes like 5 years, 7 years, something like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I'm always now like quadruple impressed when I meet someone who's a PhD. And also you've just been really what I love about what you're doing, and I want to dive into it here, is taking I always call myself like the DJ, right? Like I take all these different modalities and it downloads into like my secret sauce, and you clearly have that. So just before we even dive in more deeply, everyone listening is probably have some familiarity with attachment style and all of those things. And I know you have like a completely different take on it. So how is what you're doing different from the OG attachment style model that most people are familiar with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously the original work was with John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, and it started out of Cambridge University. And John Bowlby talked a lot about the 4 attachment styles. And obviously we have secure, we have anxious preoccupied, we have dismissive avoidant, and we have disorganized. And a big part of the focus of the work that I do isn't on like changing that traditional model, but it's about talking about how we're not born with an attachment style. It gets conditioned into us through our childhood experiences and events. And because a big part of my original background was also in hypnotherapy, I spent a lot of time focusing on how we can rewire our attachment style to become securely attached. And over time, and doing a lot of research with people and working one-to-one with so many different individuals, and then eventually moving into the online program space, what I found is there's a very easy to replicate process that can take us from, okay, what are the 5 major factors that securely attached individuals have that insecurely attached individuals don't seem to have, and how can we basically reverse engineer those steps to become an earned secure attachment style?
I love this so much because I was doing a lot of calls with people, and they come in and it's almost like their dossier. They're like, you need to know, I'm an avoidant, anxious avoidant, like, this is it. This is who I am. Like, this is what I have. This is my destiny.
Yeah.
And I always was so frustrated because the minute you label yourself, that becomes part of your identity. And then it's really hard to change because you're actually wiring in your beliefs about yourself. So when you think about this in terms of your clients, like, what are some of the core beliefs that you are rewiring around each of those traditional attachment styles?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So what I found is each attachment style has these specific core beliefs that show up in relationships. And they're sort of like their wounds from their childhood. And for anybody who's a little less familiar with attachment styles as well, I like to think of our attachment style as basically being the subconscious set of rules that we learned about love and connection. And as an analogy, if you were to sit down and you were to play a board game with somebody and they have a different set of rules for how the game works, it's going to be really confusing. Like if we go to sit and play a board game and you have the rules for Monopoly and I have the rules for Scrabble, even if we want to play the game together, if we don't realize that we have a different rule set, we're going to be arguing over what's going on. Like, hey, wait, it's supposed to be this way. No, it's supposed to be this way. And so, when we look at that and we can sort of extrapolate out that analogy in terms of love and connection, if somebody has a different attachment style than you, they have different subconscious expectations. They have different needs. They have different ways they give and receive and communicate love, but they also have different relationship fears or wounds. And so what happens is, because attachment styles are really that study of how our childhood relationships affect our adult relationships, you can see these big unresolved fears that we have because of our early childhood experiences. And what happens is the subconscious mind hangs on to these fears very tightly, thinking that it's doing this to protect us. And if you can imagine, if you're walking in the forest and you see a bear, and then you run away and you're safe, but then the next day you have to walk back through the forest, your mind is going to be reprojecting out, oh my goodness, there's a threat of a bear, and looking for the bear everywhere and worrying about it. And so these subconscious core wounds that we have from our painful relationships and our upbringing are things that not only do we store, but we constantly reproject. We constantly imagine they're about to happen to us again. And so different attachment styles have these different core wounds. And for the anxious preoccupied, the one who tends to be needy or clingy in relationships, they have the biggest core wounds of fearing being abandoned, alone, excluded, disliked, rejected, unloved, and unsafe if somebody pulls away from them. And then, of course, not good enough, which is a fairly commonly shared core wound. For the dismissive avoidant attachment style, the one who tends to be more, commitment fearing in relationships and slower to warm up and wants to keep people at arm's length, their big core wounds in relationships tend to be around being seen as defective. Believe it or not, they really take poorly to criticism. They have a lot of internalized shame, which is the result of childhood emotional neglect. They also have this big fear of being seen as not good enough as well, but also of being unsafe if there's a conflict. They don't want conflict. They tend to avoid those things. They feel very emotionally safe or very emotionally unsafe in those situations. They also have this core belief, okay, I am weak if I am vulnerable. I also am weak if I open up at all. So that I am weak, big core wound comes up a lot. And a huge fear of being trapped, helpless, or powerless if they are stuck in the wrong relationship. Because if you were neglected in childhood, there's this fear that I'm just going to be stuck in a relationship where I don't really get my needs met anyways. So those are sort of those like polarizing opposites. The disorganized attachment style, because they essentially have that anxious side to their attachment style and that avoidance side to them, they share in a lot of core wounds of both sides. They fear being abandoned or alone. They also fear being trapped, helpless, or powerless. But then their other big core wounds are, I will be betrayed, I am unworthy, and people will think that I'm bad. And again, a lot of this results from having a chaotic childhood where there could have been a lot of medium T or big T trauma. And so this individual really doesn't know how to trust, how to connect, and think they can rely on people and open up to them. And yet they want love and connection more than we would typically see with a dismissive avoidant as a bigger priority. So those are some of the big core wounds. And I find that finding those and then being able to do the work to recondition those things is such a huge monumental step in one of our 5 pillars towards becoming securely attached.
Is that the goal? Like, can anyone ever say, Thais, like, I did it. I am securely attached always, all the time, in all ways. Is that like really the goal, or is it to become aware so you can keep being more of who you are and less of your attachment patterns? How do you view all of that with your clients?
I absolutely view the goal as being to become securely attached. So I myself, part of why I got into this work, I was a disorganized attachment style. So I had a lot of chaos in my upbringing. I terribly struggled in relationships in my early adolescence. And I was like, okay, there has to be a better way for this stuff. Like it can't always be this hard. And so I really sought to understand where our conditioning comes from and where those patterns really stick and stay and why we repeat them. And a lot of the answers to that are in the subconscious and unconscious mind. And so I really went down that rabbit hole for a long time in hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, a lot of different modalities that really tackle that, even things around neuroscience and how we rewire different patterns. And so because of that, first of all, just speaking from personal experience, I've now been in a relationship, a marriage with my husband we've been together for coming up on 10 years. And I can really say, I don't have any fearful avoidant patterns left.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And it wasn't an overnight process. That was a journey. Right. But I have seen so consistently that if people are willing to do the work, the needle will completely move. They can become securely attached in a relatively short period of time. It doesn't have to be a forever, 5-year kind of dynamic.
Right.
And we have to remember, we're not born with an attachment style. It gets wired and conditioned into us. And so we can leverage our understanding of how that wiring works and that conditioning works to recondition the patterns that are not serving.
I think that's so important to highlight. You can't think your way out of it, right? Because I feel like people read those books, or they'll understand. They'll they're listening to you talk, and they're like, check, 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 and they're like, oh, that's why I get anxious if someone doesn't respond to my email or call me. They understand, but what you're saying is that there has to be these modalities that you're using to actually rewire the way that your brain is processing it. And so that it can be really, I think, because I had the same experience, I think of the old version of me and I'm like, that's literally like a different version of me, 1.0 or whatever. It's hard for me to imagine that I felt that way. But when I was in that way, I couldn't imagine anything else. So what do you find is the most important thing a person needs to do, know, believe, or try so that they're actually doing the rewiring work, not just gathering information about themselves or self-awareness?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I just love that you're saying this, because awareness is an important first step, but it doesn't change anything, And if anything, sometimes we can fall into the trap, sort of like you mentioned earlier, where we identify too much with the label of something. And then it almost seems to just form that identity around things even further. Okay, I'm disorganized. So I get volatile sometimes in relationships. I'm push and pull, and that's just how I am. And it's wait, you're doing such a disservice to yourself to just stick in that without actually doing the work to free yourself of these patterns that are causing not just you pain, but also other people in your life. So, it's hard to say. There's 5 core principles that I focus on. So one is reconditioning our core wounds. And I'm happy to share a reprogramming tool for people towards the end.
Yeah, I love that.
For their subconscious, so that we don't have to constantly fear that we're going to be abandoned or betrayed or rejected or trapped. Those are such painful and difficult things to live with and live in. And those are very solvable problems when you have the right information. So rewire your core wounds. Number 2 is that we have to be able to learn our own needs and actually meet them ourselves. It's a big part of self-soothing. So for some people, they really seek validation in other people because they're pouring from an empty cup. They don't know how to self-validate and self-encourage. And so they're constantly seeking outside of them. And we have to be able to meet ourselves halfway and do some of that internal work first. And for all of these 5 pillars, what I focus on is making sure that we get this information down to the subconscious mind. So repetition and emotion is what fires and wires neural pathways. We'll talk a little bit more later when I go through the tool. Your conscious mind speaks language. Your subconscious mind speaks in emotions and images. So we have to actually speak that language and leverage repetition of emotion and imagery on a daily basis with these things so that we can actually rewire these patterns. So, to go into that second pillar, we have a reprogram our core wounds, number one. Number two, learn your own needs and how to meet them halfway yourself. Number three, learn to communicate effectively to others.
Can I ask you one question about number two? Because I just want to make sure we dive into this here. When I hear you say these things, I can imagine people are like, cool, I do that once and then, I change my wiring. And when people hear like, we have to like go into emotions and images, I can imagine a lot of people are like, okay, I never want to imagine that core wounding again. That was some bad shit. I don't want to feel scared, terrified. I don't want to end up being a puddle on the floor, right? Like people are so afraid of going there. So how do you now, because then I want to definitely do the tool, everyone, so don't worry, talk about the rest of the pillars, but how does one get the courage, right, to do that second pillar, to be like, damn, Thais is making me like not just think but feel and imagine. It's scary. How do you create enough psychological safety to even do pillar two?
Okay, so I love that you asked this. So the pillar two is just about like learning your own needs and how to meet them, like validate yourself, things like that. By doing it on a daily basis across 21 days, research shows it takes about 21 days to hardwire a new neural network so we can actually have that consistency. So for example, that should be pretty easy work. If you're somebody who constantly seeks in other people validation, encouragement, reassurance, then you have to become the person who will give that to yourself, right? So that's repeatedly doing that on a daily basis, setting little targets and goals across 21 days. The earlier pillar is the one that I think people may feel that resistance to, like the core wounds, right? My gosh, I have this core wound of feeling like I'm unworthy or unlovable and I don't want to feel that. And this is what I love about this work so much, is that it does not require you to go back into any trauma from any past experience. All it requires you to do is look at exactly what's coming up right now. So I'll share an example for a moment, if that's okay. So, I worked, let's give a big trigger warning, but I would often have clients who would come to me around experiences with sexual abuse. And obviously that's a really triggering experience. And, when we unpack those things and we go back and we relive them, we're essentially experiencing the emotions and sort of firing and wiring those same experiences back into our mind's awareness. So, unearthing that, unless we have a way to repackage it and restore it at a subconscious level in a healthier way, can be, if anything, sometimes even counterproductive for people. It's just re-triggering. And so what I would really focus and specialize in with people was not reliving experiences, just reprogramming the core wounds around these things. Okay. So for example, people who, when they experience sexual abuse, they tend to have similar core wounds in common. They feel like I am bad, I am defective or shameful, I am unsafe, I will be betrayed or I can't trust, and I am alone. And these are big core stories that people would carry because of that. Now, of course, consciously, we all know, and even that person may know, I'm not bad if that happened to me as a child. I'm not bad. That's not me. And yet those feelings are stored there. Okay. Because that's how our subconscious frames something at the time, and we store those things. When we are trying to rewire core wounds, we don't have to go back and relive any of that. All we do is we take out those core wounds themselves. And I'll give this 3-step tool now, because it's really, in alignment with this discussion. But what we do here is we take the core wound, and in step one, we find its opposite. Okay. So let's just say, for argument's sake, somebody's saying, okay, I'm alone. So we find its opposite. What's the opposite of alone? People can Google antonyms if they want to, but you would just find something like I am connected. And so, okay, I am connected, or even I am worthy of connection. Okay. So our step two is that we can't speak to our conscious mind. I'm not a big believer in affirmations, because affirmations are just your conscious mind speaking to your conscious mind. Your conscious mind speaks language. Your subconscious speaks, like we talked about earlier, emotions and imagery. If I were to say to you, whatever you do not think of the pink elephant. Your subconscious
pink elephant, right?
So we flash the image of the pink elephant. So your conscious mind hears do not, your subconscious just sees in emotions and images. And so we need to speak to our subconscious mind, because nobody is choosing to wake up every day and believe that I am alone, or I'm going to be alone forever, or I'm not good enough. So in step two, what we do is we come up with 10 pieces of memory of times we actually did feel connected. Times people did show up for us and how we were worthy of connection and where that connection exists in our life. And the reason we pick memories is because all memories are basically a container of emotions and images. If you think of your favorite childhood memory and maybe it's you playing at the playground with your friends, you see the images of the slide. And we've all seen when people recount old stories, they smile or they laugh or because the emotions are intact in our memories. And so what we do is by coming up with 10 pieces of memory to support the new idea being the opposite of the original wound, I am alone, I am connected. Okay, 10 times that actually had people connect with me, show up for me, be there for me. Then I'm feeling the image, or I'm feeling the emotions, I'm seeing the images of those. And in step 3, we record those things down, ideally into your phone, somewhere you can listen back on a daily basis. And every day for 21 days, for the first hour that we wake up in the morning, okay, like first thing we do it in the morning, we listen back to those 10 pieces of memory to support the new idea of how we are worthy of connection when we did feel connected, and we feel about them and we see about them. Now, the reason we do this the first thing in the morning is because the first hour that you wake up, especially before you drink coffee, your brain is producing more alpha brainwaves. And when you're producing more alpha brainwaves, you are in a suggestible state. It's part of what a hypnotherapist tries to get you into when they are when they're going through these scripts. So we're actually basically reconditioning your own subconscious mind in alignment with a lot of similarities that we would go into hypnotherapy for, except we don't need to go in and rely on somebody for a session every time. This is something we can do from our own home all the time. And the beautiful part of all of this is it doesn't require recounting old traumas and going back through them. It just requires us looking at what current triggers and core wounds are a big part of our conditioning and doing the work on those very specific things.
I love this so much because one of the things I always talk about is the polarity, right? Like in each of us, right? There are parts of us, right, that had those traumas, right? The medium, big, smalls, right? And there are parts of us that have had those 10 positive experiences that are evidence of our wholeness, of our amazingness, of our worthiness, right? And this is so important to really hear, because I think that with the negative cognitive bias, right, and our mental laziness, right, we just say that this is what our future is or this is who we are without really understanding that both of those things are there. It's like, which muscle are you going to develop, right? It's like saying you didn't get muscles and you went to the gym for like 2 days. Right? That's never going to happen. Right. So I love this. I love the 21-day thing. The other thing, the name of the show is Life Check Yourself. And I just life check myself while you're talking. I'm like, girl, you need to do your meditation before you look at your email, check your Instagram, right? Because my routine is like, I open my eyes, I scroll, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to meditate or whatever. And I'm missing my alpha wave time, Thais.
Very true.
Damn. Okay. So everyone, if you want to join me, I'm going to 21 days. I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to focus on my 10 core positive memories. I think that's such a cool thing. Okay. Let's talk about the other 3 pillars.
Yes. Okay.
So there's 5 pillars, right? So we got one, which is, tell me again.
Rewire core wounds. So those ideas we talked about earlier, the abandoned, alone, trapped, helpless, powerless, betrayed, disrespected, unloved, all those painful things that we carry, they show up as the biggest triggers in our lives and relationships. So find the opposite of that statement, 10 pieces of evidence to support the new idea or memories to support the new idea. Listen back for 21 days when you're in that suggestible state. So that's rewire core wounds. Number 2, learn to understand your own needs and actively show up for them to meet them within yourself for 21 days as well, because we're patterning it in so it becomes a new normal. And that happens through habituation, right? That's how we make something subconscious. I think everybody's had the experience of when you first try to drive a car, or maybe if somebody doesn't drive, ride a bike, but when you first try to drive a car, you're like, oh my God, steer the wheel, put on the signal, look in the rearview mirror, look over your shoulder, check your blind spots. It's a conscious process and it's difficult. It wears on you. There's so much to keep track of at once. It won't feel good to meet your own needs every day until it's patterned into the subconscious and becomes normal. Then we fast forward, we've practiced driving the car for a while, we're getting used to it. And now you're listening to a podcast and listening to the radio while you're driving. And you're, often thought, because we've actually habituated it into our subconscious subconscious mind, and it feels a lot more effortless. The same thing happens with our needs when we learn to meet our needs on a daily basis and just naturally show up for those things because we patterned it in a little mechanically across the first 21 days. It becomes our new normal. So that's that second pillar. The third pillar becomes, I need to learn to communicate those needs to others. So
yeah, there's that.
So for myself, when I was a fearful avoidant or a disorganized attachment style, or the same thing, I would try to really be there for other people, but I was terrified to ask for help. Like it was I was scared of being a burden. I assumed that it would be rejected anyways, because I didn't get a lot of the support that I needed growing up in certain difficult situations. And so I was like, I'm never asking for help. And I realized that I was only making space for these one-way relationships when I did that. Mm-hmm. And I was further fueling these underlying core wounds of feeling alone and unseen and unheard, because until I can truly share myself without conditions, I can't be loved in any way that's not conditional. And so I learned, okay, I have to communicate my needs, share what I need to form these closer relationships and healthier bonds of reciprocity instead of what my past patterns were, which were like give to other people, block receiving, feel burnt out, withdraw, feel resentful. And so communicating our needs is such an important part. And again, it's going to feel scary at first for a lot of people. It's going to feel strange at first for a lot of people until it's conditioned in. So we do that for 21 days. We pattern it in. We practice asking for one need a day from somebody and actually actively receiving it. And that habituates us. It becomes our new normal.
So it's so interesting that when you think about that asking for help or communicating a need, so many people will say, I'll say like, what do you need? And they're like, I don't know. And someone had once said to me that I don't know means I don't want to deal with it. But I also think that there's some people that really don't know because they're so out of practice that they're like, I don't know what I would need. When someone says like, how do you figure out what you need? Because they've literally never had to answer that question before because they're not used to it. How do you start that process?
Okay, so great question. So I actually have done enough research on needs at this point to know them by attachment style. So I'm going to share them by attachment style. But of course, it can be a unique and individual experience for everybody. And when we dive into this concept, one of the things that's so important is that you can also ask yourself, what am I seeking from other people all the time? In a perfect world, in an ideal relationship, if I could wave a magic wand and make my spouse or my friend or my family member be exactly what I needed, what would they be doing on a regular basis in the relationship? And that can be an exercise to just gain insight and introspection. But then when we dive in a little bit further and we talk about needs by attachment style, generally I'll see our anxious attachment styles. They tend to need a lot more validation, encouragement, support, reassurance. They want to feel seen and heard. They want to feel like they're wanted and like they're a priority. So those are the big needs there, and they need a lot of certainty. If somebody cancels plans, tell you why, rebook them, those sorts of things. So that's our anxious, and a lot of people will generally feel like, okay, those are big needs for me. Our dismissive avoidant attachment styles, they're usually the ones that are like, I don't know what I need, or I don't need anything from anybody. I'm fine, right? Because they've learned to be hyper independent. But they actually really do have relational needs, and they'll know them because when somebody meets these things for them or shows up for these things for them, they light up. They feel really good about it. And these needs are obvious. The freedom, independence, autonomy, of course, that we see. But the less obvious are dismissive avoidants do very well when they feel like they are accepted, acknowledged, and appreciated. Okay. So when they get like sincere forms of appreciation, somebody says, hey, thank you for doing the dishes. Hey, thank you for showing up and having that hard conversation. I really appreciate it. When they have these sincere forms of appreciation and acknowledgement, that goes a very long way for them. They really want to feel accepted. They desperately yearn to feel the opposite of judgment in their relationships because they have these big shame wounds and they don't want to feel like that. So the more somebody's accepting of them for who they are, even in their imperfect moments, it doesn't mean you don't say, hey, let's work on this together. But if we can approach it from this space of openness and understanding that we're all imperfect, that goes a very long way for them. So that's huge. And then the last ones are supportiveness and empathy. empathy and understanding. When they feel like somebody's empathizing with them, even though they're so stoic and they won't often show it, it goes such a long way. So those are a big dismissive avoidant. And then last but not least, and then last but not least, for fearful avoidant, they tend to really care about in their relationships, novelty, challenge, depth, growth. They want to have this intimate connection with somebody, and they want to really know the person deeply and be known. And yet, at the same time, the contradictory part of fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment is they also want their freedom and independence and autonomy. So it seems like they're on opposite sides. We want the depth and intimacy, but they're not mutually exclusive things. And then the very last piece that's so important for fearful avoidance is they really need to be able to trust. And trust, I often say we have our C's of trust: congruency. So if I say I'm going to call you back and I never call you back, you're not going to trust that I'm going to call you back because I'm incongruent with what I say and what I do. So congruency really brews a lot of trust, or breeds a lot of trust. The second one is consistency. Right? We need somebody to show up consistently. If they're kind of missing in action all the time, we won't trust. We also need consideration. Consideration is like, if somebody's like, hey, how are you feeling about that? Are you good? Are you okay with this? When they're taking us into consideration, it builds trust. And then context. So if you're like, hey, I'm canceling plans, see you later, that's different than saying, hey, I'm canceling plans, I'm under the weather, but I'd love to see you on Sunday. And so that context for things also builds trust. So those are the big needs for the fearful, avoidant, or disorganized, because they have such big trust wounds. And those, again, all of those things are needs per attachment style that aren't just needs that each individual has with themselves, but also are the needs that we have from other people in our relationships.
And that's such a great, so everyone should like listen to this, take notes, right? Because when you are saying, I don't know, these are great like drop down menu items for you to start practicing with and being like, oh, I guess I do need that. And I also want to clarify, like, we have the ability to communicate, this is what I need. When you're talking about like my needs, it's not like I need for you to like necessarily go pick up some milk at the store. Yes. But these emotional needs are also on the table, in which we are asking to get those met at least once a day. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And the practice of meeting those yourself daily and then asking for them daily really allows yourself to feel more seen, more heard, more considered, and more connected, because the biggest way that we actually give and receive love is through our needs. I'm sure you've probably heard, Marni, of the 5 love languages.
Yes.
And the work of Dr. Gary Chapman, and that's amazing work. But I find that to be like an umbrella. So, for example, I'm somebody who, one of my biggest love languages is quality time. That's like my highest one. But if I'm spending quality time with somebody watching television versus spending time having a deep conversation, because depth and intimacy and emotional connection are big needs, obviously the emotional connection piece is going to be so much better than just the overall quality time that I'm spending with somebody watching TV. So, the interesting part is that these needs that we have actually provide a much deeper, clearer way that we give and receive love. And when we understand our needs and the needs of the people around us who we love, we can actually connect to them in the way that they need and in such a more powerful form. So that's the third pillar. And there's still 2 more pillars, but I just want to pass it over to you if you have anything you want to add.
That's so huge. Okay, let's talk about the last 2. Because we don't want to leave a triangle when we have 5. We don't want it to tip over. We need all the pillars.
Okay, perfect. So the fourth one is we have to be able to regulate our nervous system. All insecure attachment styles spend a little too much time in sympathetic nervous system mode, so our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, rather than in parasympathetic, our rest and digest. And the nice thing about this is that it's a pretty easy thing to hardwire if you're willing to do the work. So, I always just recommend a morning and evening habit. Again, we're most suggestible in that first hour that we wake up, and also the last hour before we go to sleep. So after we've done those first sort of 3 parts of our work, where we're practicing reprogramming core wounds and meeting our needs and communicating them, well, now we can actually go into, let's do 21 days of nervous system activities. And so we'll do breath work or meditation or a mindfulness practice or anything that's teaching us to be present in our body and present in our experience and get out of this incessant doing mode and into being mode. And when we're able to do that, we're teaching our body, you don't constantly need to be doing in order to survive. You can rest, you are safe. And by practicing being present with ourselves and in our body, even through things like body scans too, like there's so many easy activities, as we do that in that suggestible time slot, that actually retrains our mind and body to be more connected to feeling safe, being in parasympathetic nervous system mode. And what you'll see as a result of that is it feels like time slows down a little bit. You don't always feel like you're under pressure and rushing and under stress. You'll see that you're less reactive and you make way less decisions from fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And I think we can both agree that when you're making decisions from fight mode, you maybe you're overly defensive and you say things you don't mean and you regret it later, and that causes chaos. Flee mode, maybe you quit jobs all the time the moment you see something wrong and you're too flighty and then you're constantly starting life over. Or freeze mode, maybe you're avoiding paying your bills or looking at them in the drawer or, taking action towards things that are important for you because you're just frozen and avoiding. Or fawn mode, we people please our way through life and interactions until we feel resentful or unseen or not known and considered by others. So getting out of that space and getting our body more into parasympathetic is another huge pillar of rewiring our attachment style.
All more reasons why the concept of creating time for stillness is so important to really creating a life of meaning and fulfillment. Because if we are frenetically doing all of these things to try and band-aid our way to our goals, right? Like we're constantly going to end up being frustrated, right? And so everything that you've said is so like intentional. It's slow. It takes time. It takes consistency. And I think some of the hardest things for people to do are to have their own words and actions match around taking the time to undo what has taken years and years and years to make. So I love that this is so grounded in like reality, right? Like you're not going to like do a thing and then go to a weekend thing or take this one thing and do this one thing. And you're going to be like, healed, right? There's a lot of intention. Okay. Let's talk about the last pillar, Thais.
Last pillar is learning boundaries. Such an important part. And, you'll see that, of course, our anxious attachment styles, they tend to be boundaryless, or dismissive avoidance, they tend to be too extreme with their boundaries sometimes and unwilling to make compromises. So we all have different dysfunctions in our boundary issues. Fearful avoidance or disorganized will often be, in a space where they don't set boundaries, they people please, then they get frustrated, then they get angry and they say things they don't mean. And then they go back to struggling with setting boundaries again because they feel guilty or things like that. So each attachment style has a unique relationship to how their boundaries may have dysfunction or maladaptive behaviors. But the powerful part of it is that, hey, guess what? You can rewire your relationship to boundaries as well. And so we practice something called exposure work across 21 days. You set a boundary daily, you practice communicating your boundary. And, we talk a lot about the specific language you can use and how to use a regulated tone, but strong language. Because if you say things like, I have this boundary, if you don't mind, or, please stop doing that if that's okay with you, so we have to use closed language. We say things like, hey, this isn't acceptable in our relationship. I need you to respect that going forward. Thank you. Things like that, where you can be very direct and intense with your language, but soft and regulated in your tone. And that's where we're actually most likely to be heard in terms of our boundaries. So do a little boundary training there with our language and defining our boundaries and auditing them. And then we practice really setting them across that 21-day period.
Amazing. Okay. So my guess is, can we learn lots more about all of this in your book, which is called Attachment Theory, A Guide to Strengthening the Relationships in Your Life? Is this all in there?
So it's actually my second book. So the second book is called Learning Love. And it is basically learning love is sort of premised on the idea of like really learning self-love and doing this through being able to dive into some of these different patterns. It helps people find more about their attachment style, but it's really focused on the rewiring part in the second book and how we can create transformation.
I love it. So we're going to have a link to this book in the show notes. And also if you go there, there's a quiz, there's an attachment quiz and lots of other information about this amazing work that you're doing. So, so cool. And so all of that will be on the show notes, ladies. Thais, thank you for being here. This was so well organized, concise, and insightful and specific. I mean, ladies, was this not your favorite episode ever? I mean, so good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful to be here and appreciate you.
So fun. So ladies, here's the thing. This little show is called Life Check Yourself. Say that all the time because it's not just for your entertainment. While I do hope to entertain you, it's also for you to get your shit together. So 21-day challenge. Get the book. You have 5 pillars. Pick one. Start with one. Share this with your friends who are struggling, who are hurting, and let them know that there's a way that you can be spoken to. There's a way that you can get your needs met. Because really this whole organizational system that you have around this, it's so whole. And I love that, Thais, right? Like it's really about like looking at ourselves in a whole way, an integrated way, so that we can show up from our soul, right? Like, because what you're talking about is you're like, you got to rewire all of these things that were programmed into you when you didn't have a choice that allowed you to survive. And then there's this point in our life where we're like, hey, it's time for me to like, now start emerging and being more of who I am. And this is such a profound and thorough way to do that. So thank you for sharing it.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say one thing quickly. It is always more work not to do the work. It may sound like work, but it's always worse if we just leave it. So for anybody who's like, oh no, 21 days, please give yourself that chance.
Yeah, because here's the thing. So there's a new show when we're recording this. It's I think it's called Nobody Wants This. It's like a sitcom. It's really cute. I'm totally watching it. But I'm seeing all over the internet right now, people are like, I binged it. I watched. Okay. So I think there's like there's like hours, like 3, 6 hours, like 8 hours maybe of watching television, right? Like, and then people are just talking about it. They're doing it. They're excited to do it. They're making plans. I've seen online. I'm watching it this weekend. And I hold that and then I go, well, 21 days of 10 minutes is like too much.
Right.
Like I couldn't do that. I don't have time for that. I'm busy this weekend. It's like, girlfriend, you are literally telling me that you are going to sit your ass on the couch for like 4 hours and watch TV. So I'm saying, be the person that you want to have in your life. Like be the person who gets shit done, who makes things happen. And yes, enjoy your TV, but also don't always say, are you more committed to your bullshit or more committed to your vision? So like Thais says, it's much harder to not do the work. So y'all watch your show about the cute little rabbi and his girlfriend, and then also do your 21 days of stillness. Okay. Let's all agree.
Love that.
You guys can find me at Marni Battista _ on Instagram. Let me know what your favorite part. Let me know how your challenge is going. In the meantime, I say it again. Don't forget to life check yourself. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now. Thanks for tuning into today's show. Do you ever wake up feeling like you've already run a marathon before the day even begins? Does your coffee need a coffee just to get through the morning? Well, I feel you, and I've been there. Burnout isn't just a buzzword. It's a reality for far too many of us, especially as we navigate life over 40. But here's the good news. You don't have to accept feeling perpetually drained as your new normal. I'm excited to introduce my new flagship, Live Life on Your Terms program. This isn't just another Band-Aid fix or a fluffy self-care promise. This is about real transformation. We're diving deep to tackle the root cause of your burnout, regulate your nervous system, lower your cortisol and adrenaline, and rewire your neural pathways to transform how you feel in your life from the inside out. Imagine this, waking up energized, not by caffeine, but by excitement and passion for the day ahead. Picture yourself managing stress with grace and finding joy in moments big and small. That's not just a dream or a someday. It's within your reach now. So, if you like what you've heard and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working together, here's what I want you to do next. Email me at vip@datingwithdignity.com. Don't wait for one day. Make today your day one so we can create your next chapter. I'm Marni, and I'll talk to you soon.